Most people have absolutely no idea where their money actually goes. They get paid, they spend, and by the end of the month, they're wondering why they have nothing left. It's not really their fault, though, because nobody teaches you this stuff. Schools teach you calculus and the capital of France, but they don't teach you how to actually manage your money in a way that doesn't leave you completely broke and stressed out all the time. The good news is that there's a simple framework that can help, and it's been around for decades. It's called the 50-30-20 rule, and it might just be the most practical piece of financial advice that actually works. So what is this rule actually saying? Well, at its core, it's straightforward. You take your after-tax income and divide it into three categories: 50% for needs, 30% for wants, 20% for savings and debt repayment. That's it. You don't need an app or a spreadsheet you update obsessively. You just need these three numbers and try to roughly hit them. Now, if you're thinking that sounds too simple to work, well, you're not alone. But here's the thing about simple rules. They work because they're simple. They stick in your brain, they're easy to remember, and they give you a framework that prevents terrible financial decisions. Most budgeting methods fail because they're too complex. People give up after 2 weeks and go back to old habits. But the 50-30-20 rule is simple enough that you can actually maintain it. Let me break down what each category means. Your needs are expenses you absolutely have to pay. Rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, transportation to work, minimum debt payments. These keep a roof over your head and food on the table. If you don't pay, you're in trouble. The tricky part is the line between needs and wants gets blurry. Is Netflix a need? No. Is a gym membership? Not really. Is eating out? Absolutely not. But it's easier than cooking. This is where it gets messy. People spend way more than 50% on things they call needs when they're actually wants. They justify expensive rent as a need. They call car payments a need. They convince themselves coffee shops are a need, and suddenly they're spending 60, 70, even 80% on needs, then wonder why they can't save anything. Your wants are everything that isn't essential, but makes life enjoyable. Entertainment, dining out, hobbies, travel, video games, streaming services, concert tickets. And here's what most financial advice gets wrong. You're supposed to spend 30% on wants, not 0, not 5% scraped together, 30%. Traditional gurus tell you to cut all discretionary spending and live like a monk. That's why most people fail. They make life miserable, burn out, and fall back into old patterns. The 50-30-20 rule acknowledges that you're human. You want to enjoy life while living it. You should spend money on things that make you happy. The key is doing it strategically, within a defined budget, not just spending whatever's left after needs. Then there's the 20% that goes to savings and debt repayment. If you have high interest debt, this might be going towards credit card payments. If you're debt-free, this is going into savings, retirement accounts, emergency funds. This is the part that actually builds your future. And here's where the real power of this rule comes in. Even if you only manage to hit 20%, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually very achievable, you're building a safety net. You're creating a buffer against emergencies. You're giving yourself options. Without that 20%, you're living paycheck to paycheck forever. And one unexpected expense sends you spiraling. Now, the interesting thing about the 50-30-20 rule is that it's been used for literally generations, but there's still a lot of confusion about how to actually apply it in the real world. Let's say you make $50,000 a year. After taxes, that's maybe $38,000. 50% of that is $19,000 for needs. That's about $1,580 a month. 30% is $11,400 for wants, which is around $950 a month. 20% is $7,600 for savings, about $630 a month. That actually seems doable for a lot of people, But then you live in a city where rent alone is $2,000 a month, and suddenly you're already over budget before you've even bought food or paid utilities. This is where people get frustrated with the rule. They think it's a failure of the framework, when it's actually a failure of their income relative to their cost of living. Here's the reality that nobody wants to talk about. The 50-30-20 rule works great if you're living in a place where your cost of living is reasonable. It works amazingly if you're making a decent income. But if you're in a major city making minimum wage, or if you're dealing with medical expenses, or if you're in a situation where housing costs have completely spiraled out of control, like they have in places like Vancouver or Sydney or New York, then hitting the 50% target might be literally impossible. You might be at 60, 70, sometimes even 80% just on housing and essentials. And at that point, you have to adjust the rule to fit your reality. Maybe for you it's 65, 25, 10, maybe it's 70, 15, 15. The percentages aren't sacred. The important thing is that you have some framework, and you're being intentional about where your money goes. One of the reasons the 50-30-20 rule actually works when people manage to apply it is because it forces you to make choices. If you know you can only spend $950 on wants, you have to pick. Do you want to go out to eat 4 times this month? Or do you want to buy that new headphones? Do you want to keep the gym membership? Or do you want to travel somewhere? This process of choosing is painful sometimes, but it's also liberating. Instead of feeling guilty about every purchase, you're making deliberate decisions. You're choosing to spend money on the things that actually matter to you and cutting out the things that don't. A lot of people find that when they start tracking their spending, they realize they're spending money on things they don't even remember buying. Subscriptions they forgot about, apps they're no longer using, memberships they never go to. It's genuinely shocking how much money bleeds out through these tiny expenses. The other massive advantage of the 50-30-20 rule is what happens to that 20%. Let's go back to our $50,000 earner. $630 a month, $7,600 a year. Over 10 years, that's $76,000. If you're putting that into an account that's earning even a modest 3% interest, you're looking at close to $80,000. Now, a lot of people will say that's not very much money. But you know what? It's enough to handle a job loss for a couple months. It's enough to handle a car repair. It's enough to actually have options when life goes sideways. And that's assuming you're only making $50,000. If you're making $100,000, you're putting away almost $15,000 a year. Over 10 years, that's over $160,000, even without investment returns. That's not nothing. That's a down payment on a house. That's the difference between being able to retire at 65 and having to work until you're 75. The real magic of the 50-30-20 rule is that it's a system you can actually stick with. It's not restrictive enough to make you miserable, but it's not so loose that you end up broke. A lot of people try to go too extreme. They try to live on 30% of their income so they can save 70%. That's great if you can pull it off, but most people can't. You spend 3 months eating beans and rice, not buying anything fun, not going anywhere, and then you burn out and go back to your old habits. But the 50-30-20 rule lets you save 20% while still enjoying your life. You can still go out, you can still have fun, you can still take that trip you've been thinking about. You're just being strategic about it. One thing that trips a lot of people up is when they're starting to use the rule and they realize they can't hit the 50% for needs. This is actually more common than you might think, especially if you're living in an expensive city or if you're dealing with a lot of debt. If you're in that situation, the first thing to do is look at whether your needs category actually contains wants. Are you paying for a fancy apartment when a cheaper one would work? Are you driving a car that costs way more than you need? Are you paying for services you don't actually use? Sometimes there's fat to trim, but sometimes there isn't. Sometimes you're living somewhere where housing costs $40 a year because the economy is broken and there's nothing you can do about it on an individual level. In that case, you have a few options. You can try to increase your income. You can try to move somewhere cheaper. Or you can adjust your ratios to 55, 25, 20, or 55, 30, 15. The rule is a framework, not a law of physics. You can adjust it to match your reality. What's important is that you have some system, any system really, that keeps you from just drifting into debt. Because that's what happens to most people. They get paid, they spend, they don't think about it too much, and then suddenly they're $30,000 in debt and they have no idea how it happened. The 50-30-20 rule prevents that because it forces you to be intentional. Every dollar has a category. Nothing is hidden. You know where it's going. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The rule also works as a diagnostic tool. If you track your spending and realize you're spending 70% on needs, that tells you something important. It's not that you're bad at budgeting. It's that something is wrong with either your income or your cost of living situation. And once you know that, you can actually do something about it. Maybe you need to find a way to earn more money. Maybe you need to look at your housing costs. Maybe you need to move somewhere cheaper. But at least you know what the problem is, instead of just feeling vaguely anxious about money all the time. The other thing that makes the 50-30-20 rule powerful is that it compounds over time. If you stick with it for 10 years, you've got a real emergency fund. If you stick with it for 20 years, you've got serious wealth building up. And the beautiful thing is that it doesn't require you to be a financial genius or to make a ton of money. It just requires consistency. You don't have to hit the numbers exactly every month. You can be approximate. Some months you spend a bit more on wants, other months you spend less. As long as you're roughly in the ballpark over the course of a few months, you're doing it right. One last thing is that the 50-30-20 rule works better if you automate it. Set up automatic transfers on payday. Put 60% into your checking account for needs and wants. Put 20% into savings automatically. This removes temptation to spend the savings and the burden of deciding where everything goes. Your money is already allocated before you can touch it. If you want to see more practical financial frameworks that actually work in the real world, you should definitely check out our other video on building wealth without sacrificing your entire life. It covers some similar territory, but goes into different strategies that work alongside the 50-30-20 rule. You should be able to click that on your screen right now. Thanks for watching, mate. Bye.